Hello, everyone, and welcome to my review and recap of The White Lotus, Season 3, Episode 7, Killer Instincts. Without further ado, let's just get into it. And we'll start here with the Bangkoking crew, Rick, Frank, and Shritala. The episode opens with this crescending music played while Muay Thai fighters prepare for a bout. At Shritala's large estate, Rick makes an awkward introduction to Jim Hollinger, played by the formidable Scott Glenn. As a devotee of the show The Leftovers, I love seeing the mini off-screen reunion between prior castmates Carrie Coon and Scott Glenn. Shritala, Jim, Frank, who goes by Steve in this meeting, and Rick discuss the fake film production in the living room. Shritala hits Frank with the basic question: what have you directed? He flubs about some action film called The Enforcer, The Executor, and The Notary. It's like a trilogy. They mention Jacqueline Lemon, and Frank isn't even familiar with her. So again, very unprepared sleuthers. They should have come at least with some Googleable version of Shritala's life. With that being said, and I'll talk about this later, I did Google the actress who played Shritala for another reason I'll mention, and I did realize it can actually get very difficult to Google people in Thailand because everything is in Thai and there's no key on on my laptop or any English speaker's laptop that is going to match onto a Thai language. So it was very difficult to find anything on her outside of very brief outlines on Wikipedia and other English language sites. So yeah, I do think there's something to be said about Frank and Rick not being able to do a lot of research because Shritala's everything that she's done is in Thai. So the fake film that Frank talks about is a thriller, which begs the question of Shritala's role. Shritala is obviously offended by the prospective role because it's a former prostitute formed madame, and she's realizing she was informed by Rick that the role would be based on her, and she's wondering where this former prostitute line comes from. Frank is barely able to recover from this blunder until Rick comes up with the save of the role includes singing. After this back and forth, Frank decides to take a break from his 10-month sobriety and ask for whiskey, which is very relatable. Conversation is awkward. Do I threaten my sobriety or do I allow this awkwardness to fill me to the brim? Let's just go ahead and drink some alcohol. But anyway, I feel really bad for Frank in this situation, but unfortunately it is the cycle of addiction where you are oscillating back and forth between sobriety and unfortunately coming off the bandwagon. Anyway, more awkward conversation follows since Frank can't bother to Google Shritala's filmography and can't name a film or a role from her. Rick suggests separating the group since he's interested in Jim's Thai conquest. He mixes Frank's pseudonym and fortunately Frank is able to catch it. Jim takes Rick to the den where they discuss Jim's ability to bypass the limited red tape in Thailand. Jim says he's is more careful than he was in the past. And Rick says the secret to life is knowing when to stop, which is a clear reference to his ill-conceived revenge plot. Jim talks about his two daughters who were raised in luxury in Thailand, which sparks Rick to talk about the importance of a happy childhood. Meanwhile, Shritala and Rick are watching one of Shritala's old videos, and she is getting it down. So the video that we see them play is an actual video of the actress who plays Shritala, Patravati or Lek Mejudon. Not pronouncing that right, I know that, my apologies. And she had her own TV show in 1992 in Thailand, and so this was an excerpt from one of her show's performances. I actually got into a rabbit hole of her online videos, but she's really a phenomenal stage presence in all the videos that I watch of her, and she's truly enrapturing. And it's clear that in her even though I can't understand Thai for the life of me, when she speaks Thai, there's just such a confidence about her. But she's just a phenomenal performer. And apparently she's one of the most important artists in Thailand because she has actually opened her own school, which is a very important school for artists to go to for performing arts. So, shout out to her for being such a presence within Thai art landscape. Meanwhile, Rick is mean-mugging Jim and telling him about how his mother told him that Hollinger killed his father on the deathbed. When Rick brings up his mother's name, there is some recognition on Jim's face, but not enough to be conclusive about the nature of Jim's relationship to Gloria, which is the name of Rick's mother. Rick then accuses Jim of killing his father and pulls out the gun and puts it at Jim. Then we get Frank out here breaking down Shritala's performance as some mixture of MC Hammer and Pippin. And I was like, bro, what? But Again, put some respect on Lex's name. If you're interested, on my Twitter, which you could follow Strategic at Strategic Delulu, I did post a video of the actor's Lex performance, which is really entrancing. Anyway, Rick is unable to shoot Jim, but does push him off his chair. Rick then rushes to get Frank out of the house, where they let the bodyguards know that Jim has fallen. In the streets of Bangkok, Rick literally throws the gun in a trash can, which I felt was very dangerous. I was like, anybody in the street could have seen that. Anybody could have gotten a hold of that gun, and that gun could be used for other things. Frank wants to celebrate with a drink, and then they go ahead and paint the town red. Frank and Rick party, but Rick seems to be taking it easy with both drinking and drug consumption. The last we see of Rick is him smiling while watching the party festivities, and it looks like he's finally found some peace. So my idea with this whole storyline is it's difficult to really believe it, and I think a lot of people are just having issues with feeling like this is a compelling storyline. For example, Shritala would be able to Google Rick's full name because he's a guest at the hotel, so she would be able to see that he has no public relationship with Hollywood Productions and wouldn't take his offer to have this meeting all too seriously. And then I also wonder what's going to happen to Rick, because it's clear that his plan is to return to the hotel that Jim Hollinger owns, right? So they're going to be able to immediately identify him and possibly get him to go to jail for assault, or worse, just kill him. And in real life, Rick would have asked Chelsea to join him in Bangkok so that they could avoid all the hoopla that is inevitably going to happen at the hotel when Jim Hollinger is going to be like, let's get this guy who pushed me off my chair when I invited him to my home. But I don't think that's going to happen, because for the plot, we need Rick back at the White Lotus, and there's going to probably be some tense line there with either a confrontation with Hollinger's bodyguards or even the staff trying to avenge the assault of their boss. Maybe guy talk, who knows? But enough of this storyline, let's get into that toxic friend group. The friends arrive at dinner and tensions are high. Fabian says he's going to be the entertainment for the night, and Jacqueline's advice to him is just to go for it. Fabian's songs is about him being homesick, but I wouldn't know because I can't understand German. Also, the show barely gave Fabian a 4 count, which I found funny, but I also felt bad for Fabian. Again, this was his kind of half of his storyline. He has been really short, given the short stick, which is relevant for these friend groups. He's been given the short stick in regards to his appearance on the show versus every other manager, or really the only past 2 managers of White Lotus. So Lori reiterates her interest in going to the Mai Tai fight, but Jacqueline says she's tired, which Lori then makes a snide remark about. Jacqueline, on her unearned high horse, says Lori is so bothered, asks why Lori is so bothered, and Lori is honest that the situation has to do primarily with her trust in Jacqueline. Jacqueline is a master manipulator because she doesn't even address the trust thing and says that Lori isn't into Valentine. Kate agrees with Jacqueline and says that Lori is making this a bigger deal than it has to be. Then, revelation. Apparently, Jacqueline was flirting with Kate's husband Dave at Lori's wedding. This is just said once, and it seems like Kate's a little taken aback, but because her whole thing is like, it's not a big deal, she doesn't address that up front. But also, Lori, you shouldn't have stirred the pot like that. Either way, everybody's getting hype. Everyone's putting their punches, because Jacqueline then says that Lori is projecting because she's not happy with her life. Kate then again takes Jacqueline's side, that Lori's frustration is with her own life, not with the girls. Then Jacqueline takes it too far and says that Lori's life is the result of her decisions, including marrying her ex-husband and working at a firm that won't promote her. I was a bit surprised by how Kate was continuing to dig at Lori, but Lori then gets her lick back by calling Kate fake and Jacqueline vain and selfish. Lori then decides to go to the fight by herself, and we get a killer shot of her back leaving. I mean, come on, Carrie Coon has a back of a goddess. I need to work out more because I want my back to look just like that. Anyway, I think this whole conversation needs contextualization because Jacqueline is lying, and I feel like it's very easy to forget that. Even while I was watching this conversation back and forth, it's easy to forget that Jacqueline is lying about what happened with her and Valentine. And while she accuses Lori of projection, Jacqueline is the one who's projecting in order to evade any conversation about her essentially cheating with her husband while she was on vacation. I did feel really bad for Lori in this moment because it's the only time I can recall her really complaining about her life in the show was when she was super drunk at the pool with the Russians. So I feel like Kate and Jacqueline's inability to conceive of living a life like Lori's is their own projection of overestimating her complaining. So I don't think Lori's even complaining that much. It's just that because Jacqueline and Kate can't fathom like working as a lawyer and having a husband divorce you and then you're paying palimony and having a kid that isn't like a perfect little angel, they're saying that Lori's complaining about her life all the time, when from at least my perspective, and tell me if you saw something else, Lori only complained when she was in the pool with the Russians. So yeah, anyway, at the hotel suite, Kate laments their treatment of Lori while Jacqueline responds with apathy. It's clear Kate is sure in her belief that Jacqueline cheated on her husband, and Jacqueline catches on to that fact. Jacqueline then says the most annoying thing a woman can say at this moment, or anybody: "I'll be the bad guy. I guess I'm used to it." Jacqueline's ability to lie to everyone and evade accountability is wild. Well, at the fight, Alexei gets very comfortable with Lori, and Alexei is the one with the snake tattoo. And then, of course, Lori goes and has fun, sexy time with Alexei at his apartment, who immediately transitions pillow talking into a begging session for $10,000. I really actually got nervous for Lori here because Alexei had her in bed and could have made things very difficult in terms of allowing Lori to leave before she made it clear that she was going to give him the $10,000. Well, fortunately, we didn't have to see that because Alexei's girlfriend comes in and Lori quickly gets dressed, but as she escapes, she finds Alexei's trove from the robbery and takes something. I'm assuming it is the snake bracelet. Lori leaves Alexei's apartment through the window, but not before the girlfriend sees her and gets some head slaps in. Lori gets a taxi home, and we'll just have to wait until next week to see if the women are ever able to reconcile their differences. But for the record, I am on Lori's side, so if anybody's asking, Lori is the one to go with. And I just think it's because she's honest. I think that the other woman, like, I don't know. This is going to sound so mean, but it's like, Kate, you're a housewife. I don't think you can judge other people's life choices that much. Like, what everyone's supposed to do? Just get married to a man and hope that he's willing to pay for her lifestyle? I don't know. Either way, I'm all here for Lori. I realize that I'm Lori coded. I just have been really judged throughout my life, and and I'm like, a part of my judgment for Lori is like different ways she can make her life easier. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to be like, look, I don't want to be around people and just talk about fake conversations. I want to be able to address the elephant in the room, and Lori does that on a consistent basis. So let's go ahead to the rat list, particularly the party people on who go to Greg's house, and that's Timothy, Victoria, and Saxon. So before heading to Greg's party, Tim takes 2 lorazepam pills, as Saxon reminds his mother that the party is hosted by the boat people. When Saxon says that they don't have to come, I thought something really intense was going to happen to the parents at the party, but yeah, that doesn't come to fruition. Chloe greets the family at the party, and Tim immediately asks her where the bar is. Victoria sees the people she saw on the boat and immediately asks for their names. I feel like the show wanted us to see this as rude or uncouth, but I'm a firm believer in asking people their names immediately when you recognize that you've forgotten it. Like, they met once on a boat, and Victoria had no reason to believe she'd see them again. Of course she doesn't remember their names. So anyway, I do not fault Victoria for asking those people their names. But I do fault Victoria for later implying that the Thai girl she was speaking to was coerced or pressured to be in a relationship with her partner, Rupert, who she calls a weirdo. The Thai girl claims that she loves her partner, Rupert, which Victoria escalates in saying that she can get the girl out of there, essentially implying that this girl is being sex trafficked. And while I definitely think sex trafficking is a thing across the world, I feel like once somebody gives you an assurance that they love somebody, maybe, scale back. But Victoria does her thing. I love her. She was funny in this moment. Saxon confronts Tim for his behavior and immediately clocks that Tim may be responding to something going on at work. Tim says Saxon can't help, but Saxon is concerned because his career is tied to Tim's. Tim again assures him that things are going good, but Saxon says he has no interest in hobbies, and without career success, he is nothing. Saxon says he can't handle being nothing, and Tim again lies and says that nothing's up. Tim encourages Saxon to go enjoy himself. And I have a little sympathy for Saxon here because I, unlike many people, think that the whole Nepo baby conversation is far more complex than it has to be. But I do think there's something to be said about putting all your eggs in one basket. For example, even this idea of Saxon, who's played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, it's not like all the films, all the productions he's been involved in have been produced and funded by his parents, right? He diversified his baskets, and that's the same way that most nepo babies should do it, which is that you can follow your parents' footsteps but make a path of your own. Don't try to replicate your parents' career note for note. And I've seen a lot of finance kids who are children of very famous people. They'll do things like work for another firm than their parent works for, or if their parent has their own fund, to go to the big cities like New York City or Atlanta or even Miami and try to work for a fund there so that they can get experience outside of their parents' work, and then maybe they could bring that same experience back to their family's business. But we don't see that here. And because he's trying to replicate his father note for note, it's a recipe for disaster. And also, nothing about being a nepo baby requires you to have no interest or hobbies. It's clear that Saxon knows his life is not full. So the better question for me is just, why has Saxon allowed his life to get to this point? Why hasn't he decided to have any interest or hobbies? You know, it's just kind of wild to me that Saxon would allow his life to be reduced to this fully dependent dynamic between him and his father. Anyway, Victoria prays that night that Piper will be miserable at the temple, so that Piper decides to come home. Tim then takes more lorazepam, which the way that he took it at that bed, I was like, come on, Victoria has to see this. Victoria has to know something up, because he just seems out of his mind. Anyway, Tim daydreams again, this time unfortunately of killing both Victoria and Saxon before killing himself. Fortunately, however, Tim is unable to locate the gun, and the episode ends with him looking forlornly at the open armoire. I do wonder about this idea of Tim wanting to annihilate the members of his family, especially the ones that express dependency on him. I'm assuming that it's intended to be a immersing killing, since they have expressed their inability to cope in a world without their comforts, but it also feels like a way to freeze in perpetuity their perception of him. So if he dies, they'll forever believe that he was this great provider and died. So it's really selfish in a way, right? It's this idea that I don't want you to know that I'm a fuck up, or I fucked up at least in this one way, and because of that you have to die. Because I do think there's something to be said about both Victoria and Saxon being able to live without their father in the way, or their father/husband in the way that he's presented himself in these past couple of years. And another thing, this is something I wanted to comment on, because I feel like I've seen a lot of other YouTube commentators talk about white collar criminals and what happens to them, but I very rarely have seen a white collar criminal be reduced to poverty. Maybe they become upper middle class, but it's always never poverty. Why? Because when you're going from living around, say, 15 million a year, which I think is kind of reasonable to think about, since Timothy talks about how he, quote unquote, only made 10 million from that deal he had with Kenny Gwynn. It makes sense that, like, once you go from living off of $15 million a year to maybe living off of $100,000 or $200,000 a year, you could feel like poverty, but it's not at all. You're upper middle class still, right? I just think their lifestyle will change, but nobody's going to be starved or homeless. They're just going to have to learn to adjust with not being able to spend money recklessly and having a budget, and, you know, not being able to travel whenever they want to. But otherwise, I feel like Victoria and Saxon will still be fine. I've really rarely ever seen a white collar criminal just be like, and now I'm on the streets. Like, think about any very popular white collar criminal who's been able to leave jail. There have been profiles on them, at least from my reading, in the Wall Street Journal, where they're living in the exact same big country club, and these people have stolen like billions of dollars, and they're like, yeah, no, like, I think I read this one Wall Street Journal article where a guy was complaining about how he wasn't allowed in his country club anymore, but he still lived in the same exact neighborhood, in the same exact house that he had before he went to prison. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, these people don't like you no more, but your house still looks nice. So anyway, that's just my comment on Tim, and I feel like, yeah, this show is trying to explore the psyche, I guess, of a potential family annihilator, but I just wish that we got a little bit more about what was going on in Tim's head. And I know that we can't, because most of what's going on in Tim's head, there'd be no reason for it to be spoken aloud, but Here we are. So let's go to the other members of the Ratliff family, Piper and Lachlan. At the temple, Piper and Lachlan hear a speech from Long Portera about how violence in every form is condemned in Buddhism. He says fear is the source of violence, and that violence does spiritual harm to the victim and the perpetrator. As such, Buddhism promotes nonviolence. At the monastery, Piper and Lachlan have a silent dinner, which I've done before actually in upstate New York. I was really surprised by the accommodations because I thought the way that Victoria talked about it, they'd be eating a bunch of raw vegetables and sleeping in like a massive common area with mats on the floor. Instead, it seems like Piper and Lachlan got their own rooms with pretty substantial space. And sure, it's a little dirty, but if Piper were to move there, she could clean the room herself and make the appropriate modifications. Piper visits Lachlan in his room, and Lachlan says he likes the monk and how he doesn't want to give into his dark side, or dark shit, I think is what he says, and he doesn't want to make things worse. So I'm assuming that this is in reference to his relationship with Saxon. Piper gives him encouragement, and then he suggests that he wants to stay at the monastery with Piper for a year. Lachlan doesn't want to go back to home ever. Piper is taken aback, and I think a part of her is a bit lost about her brother's intention and him somewhat infringing on her spiritual journey. A lot of people are going to say Lachlan was trying to mac on Piper, but I don't see that at all. I know that there's been this narrative online that Lachlan is this evil miser who's just trying to have sex with everyone in his family, but I really see that Lachlan really desires to stay in Thailand because he wants to get away from Saxon, which infers that he's not some freak who wants to actively seek a relationship with his siblings. He simply wants some sort of answer to what's been going on with him. I also think that based on Victoria's drug uses, it's easy to see how Piper has probably become a surrogate mother for Lachlan, which is why he might have what seems like a weird relationship to Piper, but also might be why Piper doesn't want Lachlan to come with her to Thailand, because she wants to be able to have an independent experience and she doesn't want to feel like she has to worry about the well-being of Lachlan. She wants to actually experience something on her own. Either way, the show doesn't do more to give us an idea of what specifically spooks Piper about Lachlan's newfound spiritual exploration, and I hope we figure it out by the time we get to episode 8. So now let's get to the Secretive Boyfriends Club with Chelsea, Chloe, and Gary/Greg. And of course, Saxon makes a very prominent appearance in their storylines. At Greg's party, Saxon makes a red-pilled comment to Chelsea that the women at the party are only with their partners because they're loaded, which also matches what Victoria says, so he's very clearly Victoria's son. Chelsea then says that Saxon's going to be one of those men in 30 years. Rightfully offended, Saxon tries to call out Chelsea's relationship with Rick, but she says that Rick's appeal is that he told her his whole life story the first day that they met. Chelsea describes their relationship as a yin and yang battle, where she is hope and Rick is pain, and eventually one of them will win. Chelsea dismisses Saxon because she needs to call Rick. Also kind of cool that we actually see the snake bite on her leg in this episode. I just don't remember seeing that bandage in prior episodes. I believe Chelsea is one of those codependent women who falls in love by seeing her fixing of a man as the ultimate form of bonding. It's a toxic love, I'll give you that. Could it be me? But I know that these women do exist, so I am now more believing Chelsea now that we know that she kind of just fell in love because, oh my God, he was talking about his life. I just hate how this relationship is based on the idea that if his pain does win out in their relationship, the pain then overtakes her as well. So we see Chloe tell Saxon that Gary wants him to stay. Gary made this whole thing about his sexual desires. Essentially, he grew up watching his parents have loud sex. And this is a conversation, by the way, between Chelsea, Chloe, and Saxon. So Chloe is just relaying this to both Chelsea and Saxon. Chelsea and Saxon are appropriately disgusted because we learned that in Gary's childhood, he kind of started feeling this jealousy about his friends potentially having sex with his girlfriends because of the loud sex he heard growing up, which led him to realize that he has an erotic fantasy, which is to catch his girlfriend sleeping with another man. Surprisingly, Chelsea seems to encourage this potential adventure, and this just feels like a far less impactful version of Frank's Asian girl monologue. Anyway, fortunately, we see Saxon actually have some sense and refuse to help with Gary's erotic fantasy. Give me one moment. I've been pausing a lot. I'm sorry. I don't know. I try to practice reading the script before I come on and I still mess up. Anyway, Saxon walks Chelsea home and says he can connect to Chelsea on a spiritual level. And so Chelsea then brings him to her room where they sit on the bed and Chelsea teaches Saxon how to meditate. While meditating, Saxon takes Chelsea's hand and she immediately jumps off the bed and gives him books to read. While this scene is admirable in terms of Chelsea not wanting to do anything that can be perceived as cheating, it also suggests that Chelsea is easily capable of creating this quote-unquote spiritual bond that she has with Rick, and knows that if she further entertains Saxon, she might be the one falling in love with him. Either way, Rick does not answer his call because he's out partying in Bangkok. So a very interesting storyline. I just felt like there is a desire for there to be a repetition of themes with the taboo-ness of Greg's sexual fantasy, but it just feels a little cheap at this point. It doesn't feel really tethered as much as these themes felt tethered in season 1 and season 2. All right, so let's get into the staff who had a pretty substantial presence in this episode. Guy Talk finally gets that date with Mook. Mook looks amazing in a true cute summer dress. The couple visit a street market, and Guy Talk says that Pilek was pleased with Guy Talk's skills at the gun range. However, while eating, Guy Talk admits that he's not going to get a promotion because Pilek doesn't believe that Guy Talk has that killer instinct. Guy Talk says that when the robbers came, he didn't feel like fighting them because Buddha condemns violence. Mook rightly rebuffs and says violence in self-defense is different. Guy Talk says he never wants to hurt people, and I truly see and believe that in him. I feel like they've crafted a character where you're like, yeah, I could see that he would never want to hurt anybody. Unfortunately, Mook finds this absolutist perspective silly in the world that we live in, which unfortunately I do agree with. The world does not allow for clean black and white lines of morality, and to truly survive, you have to be willing to address the gray areas, including self-defense. Mook wants a man with ambitions beyond being a hotel security guard, and it's clear that she thinks the Guy Talk's revelation, it affects the way that she perceives him. I just want to say, a couple having the same level of ambition is really important because a lot of decisions that are considered logical are based off of how you want your life to look, and if you guys aren't on the same page about, hey, I want to be able to move eventually to Bangkok, to a big city, or maybe even to another place in the Southeast Corridor in Singapore, whatever. If you're not on the same page, you're not going to be able to make these decisions without one person being very resentful. So I don't blame Mook. I think she was kind also to voice her opinion on the date as opposed to waiting for a later time, which kind of can come off as cruel because then it's like, has this person been thinking about this quote unquote flaw that I had this entire time we've been dating? Anyway, at the Mai Tai fight, Mook again makes the case that fighting is natural. Guy Talk sees the Russians and recognizes Vlad as the accomplice who helped the robber escape the White Lotus. A lot of people said this episode was uneventful, which I will say I agree. I just think the characters, quite frankly, and I've said this again, aren't that compelling. But I think a huge part of the reason why fans who seem to have really liked this season thus far felt like this episode was uneventful is because they already guessed the fact that the Russians were in on the robbery. This just speaks to how TV is consumed today, because I'm sure in the past it was just like somebody watched a television show, they might have thought certain things, but it's not like there was a whole economy of conjecturing about what this meant and what this could possibly mean and who does this mystery belong to. So I'm just pointing this out because I think that this could have been the big moment that justified this entire episode, but it felt anticlimactic, especially considering how long it's been since episode 2 when the robbery occurred to now we're in episode 7. So let's move on to Belinda and Zion. They're in their room and Belinda contemplates what Greg wants from her. For some reason, Zion thinks it's a good idea to go to the party and find out. This is why you don't take advice from a 22-year-old. And as a mother, sometimes you just have to put your foot down and call out buffoonery, which I think Zion expressed a little bit throughout this episode. Anyway, Belinda, of course, goes for the plot. And after being reassured by Zion that nothing would happen because he was going to be there, Greg confronts Belinda, and after some convincing, Belinda joins Greg for a private conversation. Greg comes out with it and says that he knows Belinda knows who he is. He says that Tanya's tragedy has nothing to do with him and things just got complicated back home, so he went to Thailand. Greg brings up that Tanya talked about Belinda and how she felt bad for reneging on her promise to start a business with Tanya. Greg offers $100,000 in exchange for Belinda's silence. Belinda says she has to think about it, which clearly baffles Greg, or at least just takes him aback. Belinda makes clear that she's not looking to make problems, she just needs to sleep on it. And now this is the point of the story where I remind everyone, the first offer is always the lowest. So if I'm in Belinda's shoes and I'm realizing I hold in my hand Greg's piece, I would go home and come up with some random business numbers that at least say I'm going to actually need $300,000, and maybe even add to that. And sure, I could get $300,000 and start a business, but then if the business fails, I'm kind of all out of luck. I might not be able to get my job back. There's also, loans and things that can happen to my credit, so that might also affect me and my ability to move on past maybe a potential failed business. So I said 300K, but actually it's more like 500K. Just up it and up it. At the end of the day, Belinda, you have Greg's piece in your hand, and go ahead and make sure that he's giving you all that piece is worth. Anyway, Belinda makes Zion leave the party without eating, which honestly, at least let Zion get a to-go box. Back in their hotel room, Zion encourages Belinda to take the money. Belinda feels morally compromised because she thinks taking the money would make her an accomplice to murder. Belinda says she's not doing it, and Zion says that they both might end up dead as a result of her decision. And this conversation wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gone to the party, which Zion insisted they go to. I don't know. I felt like Zion's insisted in this moment. I was just like, calm down. That's your mother. Show a little respect, a little deference here. Relax. Either way, we know Zion survives whatever violence breaks out at the hotel, and this also gives a clue as to why Zion seemed so anxious when he started hearing gunshots in the hotel, because he has a strong belief that Gary/Greg is going to go out and shoot his mother. So this episode felt in line for what most of the season has felt to me personally. So you could take that as you will. Either way, this was Strategic Delusion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.